Hey everybody, welcome to week 249, 249. So before we get really rocking and rolling, I have a math question and I'm going to toss it over to Adam, the CPA. And he did, just so you know, even though he's good on tax, um, he scored the highest on the audit on part of the CPA exam. So he likes to tell everybody that. So here it comes. Here comes the pitch. Adam, what is 249 plus 1?
250. Yeah.
You're so good. There's a reason that you got that high of a score. So next week, week 250 is our live 250th week anniversary. There's it's so good. And Adam, we've got two Adam Boatsmans on here. Um,
Yeah.
actually, you're in for a treat because one Adam Boatsman looks like Scott Upton, and for some reason we failed to get him the link. So he's Adam Boatsman too. So he's Adam Boatsman with a little fur on his face and glasses. So anyway, we've got Scott Upton on here. Jack Santinello also has some new breaking updates on CTA. It's dead. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe not. So we're going to talk about that too. But then we are really going to dive into private equities knocking. What do you do? Do you answer the door? Do you, what do you do? So we're going to get a feel for what's happening out there because there's a lot of money still on the sidelines, a lot of money chasing stuff, but we're going to get current up to the date and up to the moment insights from Scott Upton. If I was doing a deal, Scott Upton would be in my court. And, oh, by the way, anybody wants a Starbucks gift card that's going to be coming from Jack, ask Scott this question. What's the difference between an investment banker and a business broker? He's he's gonna
Shaking his
give you
head.
the answer. And there's a Starbucks gift card for anybody that asks that question.
Yeah, I
All
was gonna
right.
say we'd like to actually have him come back because he is pretty insightful versus giving us the big middle finger the next time you ask him on that one, Gary.
Hey, both of them have their place. And Scott Upton is not a business broker. We like
Yeah.
business brokers too, but he's got a defined expertise. And so, Scott, we'll ask you for kind of your area. But if anybody's paying attention, ask that question, put it in the chat, and we'll answer. So before we turn it over to Scott, Jack, give us an update on the latest and greatest CTA BOI issue.
Sure. And before I do so, I just want to say, where else can you find a program that will give you two good-looking guys with the same name and show you what they would look like in alternative universes? One with glasses and facial hair and one without. So I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
he's just AI generated Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't important enough to get the actual invite for my own, so I have to ride off of Adam. So
Right.
It was all part of our plan, part of our little skit for this
This
month,
is
right?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
April Fool's early.
Yeah.
got it.
All
Yeah.
right, so CTA, it was yesterday morning, hallelujah, internally at Shoemaker that finally, okay, we're good to go. And then yesterday afternoon, FinCEN, who is the regulatory body, sends out a notice, and it was a brief relating to a brief that was filed in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals defending the constitutionality of the CTA. So what they're saying is that the government is asserting that the CTA is constitutional, particularly applied to foreign companies, which, as you may recall, that's kind of where they ended up, which is no U.S. companies have to report, foreign companies have to report, but that the exemption doesn't discuss one way or another U.S. entities. And so there was a presumption that it only applies to, they were making a policy position, not necessarily stating a position whether or not it is constitutional, which a regulatory agency wouldn't be able to do anyway. So the application of the CTA clearly falls within Congress's constitutional powers, and that the executive branch through regulatory agencies can't modify that. It only has to be through Congress to modify that. And so basically the government is not backing down off of the CTA. Now, this is again, a brief that has been filed, so it has been decided one way or another whether that's going to impact you as businesses or not. So our advice to, and I'm again glad that we didn't jump in and say, okay, how, even though it was internal, hallelujah, it wasn't, we didn't send a memo or a client alert or anything like that that said, okay, everybody's off the hook now and all good. So hopefully that's where we end up, but it's just, I don't understand why the government keeps fighting this, because they're getting the message that nobody wants this, nobody wants to enforce this. And I don't know if it's just to get a win in their column. I just don't know. And there's a lot of speculation as to why not, politically driven, although based in law enforcement, criminal law enforcement. So that is the latest and greatest, which is sort of same as it was, but it's not dead. And as I said, I think I said that last time too, not dead. It's down, but not dead.
So for the 350th week anniversary, here's the next question. Are we going to still be talking about CTA? So who knows?
Probably.
So, 2 years from now.
Probably. So look, I can't resist, Gary. I got to go on the soapbox. The IRS needs several efficiency things that need to be done. At the same time, we're whacking people that collect the revenue and find the people that are cheating on their taxes. But we want to file a brief to enforce the thing for the people that might be laundering the money. Like, where are the people going to be to do that? Enforce this, Jack.
Yeah, right. I mean, we're talking about budget cuts, about Doge and everything else. And it's like, okay, yeah, we want you to go do these things, but we're taking away money and people. So again, for practical purposes, is this a reality of future reality in all of our business worlds? Probably not, because it's just impractical to enforce it. So it may be that it ends up being found constitutional on paper, but are you really going to get in trouble? I'm not suggesting that you break the law, but I'm suggesting that maybe the law may not be enforced against you because it is just almost an impossibility.
Yeah, it's funny because again, I know this would never happen at Shoemaker with the tax legal team there, but perhaps Adam has occasionally said to a client, nobody break the law. This is a little bit aggressive, but the odds that anybody's going to look these days is pretty freaking low. You didn't hear that, Scott?
Yeah, I did. I heard it. I may have been one of the persons you said that to. So
just say it for friends. Yeah, exactly.
And then I also want to bring up, Gary, before you start, a kind of we had talked about what incentivizes and what retains and good business practices. And so, and I think I have said I go to early morning classes occasionally. And so I received a text message back from the instructor a few hours later. It said, "Hey, Jack, great job. Great to see you coming in," kind of thing. And so I tested it and I texted back to see if it was just a group email that was, or a mass text that, incorporated my name, dear blank, and put Jack in there. And I said, "Thank you. The energy that you bring to the sessions is what keeps us motivated." And so she actually responded back. And so I was very impressed with that. But it also goes to the fact, as I said, the ISI that I go to, this particular location, just is the classes are always full, and they have found the right formula, which is the right music, the right instructors, the right energy, and people keep coming back and filling those classes, whereas other locations are not as filled. And I've been to some of those locations, and in comparison, I understand why. So again, it's about touches with the customers, with your clients, and those kind of things that will bring them back to you versus changing horses when it's convenient, or maybe even less costly, but you've engaged them enough that they appreciate the personal touches. So just a little side note from prior conversations.
Awesome. So I do want to get to our illustrious guest, and he's the only one wearing a jacket. So I'm just saying, so he's highfalutin, but he did unbutton it. So I appreciate that. You're not in a tie, so you're not selling insurance. So I know that. So here's the question, Scott. First question. What is going on in the private equity world? And then we'll dive into more like what's happening.
Yeah, and I guess related to that, if you kind of touch on like all the talk about tariffs and interest rate like in other words, like is there anything that's changed, in particular in the last 90 days?
Yeah, the last 90 days has been interesting. Obviously with tariffs, obviously with changes in the government, that we all have spoken about, but there's still $3 trillion on the sidelines. You know, we
Is that what the T, Scott?
yes, with a T, trillion. We get private equity groups that have come through our office, and we get a lot of them come through our office that haven't done a deal in a year or 18 months, a platform deal that is, which they define as something with north of $5 million in EBITDA or net profit at the end of the day. So the deal market, when interest rates went up, slowed down significantly. You saw, and that was obviously a year and a half, 2 years ago. It really hasn't recovered yet. You're starting to see blips of it here in the last 3 or 4 weeks, with deals starting to get done, because what you have is these private equity groups that are limited life funds. They get 5 years to get the money out, 5 years to get the money back. Well, if you look at COVID and you look at the timeline reaching out for that, we're about 5 years out now. And
Yeah.
if you haven't deployed some of that capital, you've either got to extend it or you've got to give it back, which no one does. So you've got a lot of this money still sitting on the sidelines trying to get out the door. So what's happened is you've got certain businesses, let's call them A assets, and we can talk about what A assets mean. And then you got B and C assets. So the B and C assets may have customer concentration, may have up and down performance. The A assets are recession resistant, have been strong for the last 3 or 4 years. What happens now is you take those companies out, the A assets out to a market, and they're getting 2 or 3 times more than they would in a normal market. Whereas the B and C assets may or may not trade or may get a lower valuation, because everybody wants the A assets right now. It's driving up values in the marketplace. So you've got low supply, high demand, and then less sellers coming to the market because of, in part to your question, Adam, less sellers coming to the market because a lot of these sellers are affected and don't know the effects of what these tariffs are going to be. So you've got kind of a standstill in new people coming to market, unless you're in a certain industry, because you don't know the uncertainty of what's happened in the last 60 or 90 days. So I would say overall, you've got high demand, low supply, and uncertainty with new government policies that has continued to make the market slow. Big joke in our industry right now, or in the private equity industry, is when is the market going to open back up? Everybody says next quarter, next quarter, next quarter, next quarter. Well, it's supposed to be first quarter of 2025. That hasn't happened yet. People are getting deals done, but there's a lot more competition and a lot less players or a lot less sellers in the marketplace.
So if you take the tariff theme a little bit forward, I mean, let's say that, I was in the middle of doing a deal. I've got an LOI in December. All of a sudden, these tariff gets announced. Like, how do you handle that? From a transaction standpoint, because I may or may not have a material change to my cost structure. Like, what are people doing?
Waiting it out. I mean, we looked at 2 metal recycling businesses in the last 60 days, non-ferrous metal and ferrous metal. And obviously, you've seen these tariffs on aluminum and steel. It's going to boost the performance of these companies up, is what it's actually going to do if they're kicked in and that takes place. So people are kind of it's a wait and see attitude. They're not, a lot of them are slowing things down or putting things on hold versus going forward, because what happens when you go forward like that is you end up with some kind of structure. When I say structure, earn out, some kind of note, some kind of performance based purchase price adjustment of some sort, because people don't, the buyer doesn't know the effects and the seller doesn't know the effects. And you've got to be willing to gamble on that or wait it out.
Got it. So going back to Gary's original question, hey, private equity is knocking on the door, should I open it? Let's assume that I do open it. How do I evaluate, is this a good group to contemplate? Like, how do they're screening me, how do I screen them? Let's say that I do open the door and I say, hey, I am interested. Let's talk more. How do I evaluate whether or not this is going to be, a douchebag riding my ass, or, hey man, you hit the numbers and you're never going to hear from me again.
Yeah. I mean, good points. I mean, one, I would say, and this sounds parochial, but I would say check references, check people that they've done deals with, former portfolio companies, the good and the bad. Usually these companies will give you the good and bad experiences they've had. Some of them they've lost money on, a lot of them they've made money on. So I would say talk to those former portfolio companies of these companies. That's the first thing I do. Then I would do what I call a background check outside of that. I would reach out to an advisor like yourself or Jack or Gary and say, all right, what do you know about these groups? What can you find out? And have that advisor make a couple of calls to people and say, hey, who do you know anyone here? What do you know about this group, etc. And the third, there's a lot of different players in the market now. There's independent sponsors which don't have actual committed capital, but go to committed capital sources. And then there's committed capital sources. So you've got to make a determination between those two, who has capital and needs to get it versus a committed capital fund. So there's no great answer to that. But if you do your homework and you try to, reach out and talk to those portfolio companies, they're usually going to tell you the truth, and get a feel for how they are when things are good. Since we're so close to, or since we were so close to COVID, how things are when things are slow or bad, because everything's good. When everything's good, there's not much to talk about. When things go bad, that's when there's going to be a lot of trying times, and you got to figure out how that group acts in a trying time like that. But there's not a great way to source them other than talking to former portfolio companies or having another resource like an advisor check with their contacts who they know, either through attorneys, accountants, whatever it may be, and see what they know about those companies. Not a great answer, but all I got.
No,
that's good.
That's pretty good. Keep it on the diligence theme for a minute. I mean, you sort of, independent of just, hey, this person's a douchebag, a factor in, Gary, I promise 2026, the year, no more swearing. In addition to
Next
Jack's
year.
Jack's like, legal compliance, dude. Come on. You're killing me.
They're
you're
smiling
killing
though.
me.
They're smiling though.
That's right.
We know what we're working with here.
Yeah, I've cleaned up my life a lot, and I just, I'm it's on the list. So independent of, okay, I kind of hit that screen. You hear the stories of, yeah, so we bought Toys R Us, but it was a leveraged buyout. And because it was a leveraged buyout, we otherwise took a great brand and tanked it because the debt service level was so high that it was just really unsustainable. And it's like, that's sort of, your worst fear is, you sign up, you got an earn out, you got a little bit of an installment note, you're going to be sticking around because they're counting on you to run the company. And by the way, what you didn't realize was this soul crushing debt, that they were using to place on the company. Can you kind of talk about like how, if I'm a seller, like how would I factor the balance sheet of the buyer into the equation, if at all, because they may or may not want to share it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you were dealing with a private equity group, the company stands on its own. But if it's a strategic buyer, I would do exactly what you said. Ask for the balance sheet. Let's see what you're working with here, and let's talk about that further. The second thing is what they're going to put on the company and how they're going to structure it. So, we always use that rule of thumb, 50-50, 50% debt, 50% equity at some level in the structure. So you've got to look at what that debt looks like, because there's so many different sources of debt now. Private credit, which is more expensive, but is better terms. Bank debt, which is, I wouldn't say expensive, but it's just bank debt and it has different terms. And then, the equity in it at the end of the day. But when you're looking at the debt, you really have to look at, and what we either do or have the buyers do is model out what the debt looks like over a 5-year period. So, hey, I'm paying $150,000 a month, or I'm paying $250,000 a month, and it's an interest only for 5 years and a balloon at the end when you sell the company. We want to make sure that, the company can go down 15 or 20% and still be able to service the debt. If it can't do that, then you don't want to put that much debt on the business, and you want to conservatively capitalize it different. So looking at it that way, you got to make sure that you can do that and be able to service that debt no matter what kind of performance you're going to have. Because let's face it, if you looked at COVID, people went down 20%, 30%, 40%. And you really need to be able to service the debt when you go down that way. One is, as you're talking to other people, and I got to plug my computer in here in a second, but as you're talking to other people and other buyers, there's going to be groups that want to put 60 or 70% debt on the business. You have to forego maybe a higher price to have a better debt component, because a lot of times you can have the best, you can have a great deal, but it's soul crushing debt, as you said earlier. It may have 70% debt. You don't want that, because one trip up in the business is in a restructuring. So, but talking to a strategic buyer, it just depends. You got to look at their balance sheet. You got to see what their debt is, what their performance has been, and where they are going forward. So there's the difference between the strategic and the private equity group. But if you look at the strategics, you say, what kind of debt do you have? What's the debt structure you're going to put on the business? And how are you going to move forward from there?
Yeah, cool. And then my last question, while Jack Googles or Chat GPT is the questions he's going to ask. We have a lot of private equity groups in Charlotte and the surrounding areas. Kind of probably the most famous one being, or most well-known one being, Carousel Capital. Can you give us a flavor for like what local people do, versus what people elsewhere do? In other words, like maybe give a flavor for like, of the deals that Scott Upton does, how many are with local Charlotte private equity firms versus not local?
Yeah, and you got to look at the flavors for what's in Charlotte. I mean, you mentioned one we did a deal with last year, Carousel. There's other businesses like Pamela Co., Ridgemont, and other private equity firms. So a lot of them have different size requirements and industry requirements, and a lot of just different requirements altogether. Answer to your question is probably about 25%, or a little less than that. 1 in 6 deals a year maybe is done with a local firm. you know, the firms in Charlotte are good firms. They've built and continued to raise capital. Furious Capital, another local firm here in town, just closed on 1.3 billion. So they've gone from, we did a deal with them, they were 200 million to 1.3 billion. So you've got a lot of firms in town that are north of $1 billion under management now, and that becomes a little more difficult to do smaller deals. And when I say smaller, less than $50 million or less than $100 million deals, because you got to get more capital out the door and you got to deploy more capital. So I would say the firms in town are good firms. They don't heavily put tons of debt on businesses. They've had great success, great returns, and have continued to refine what industries they want to be involved in. Some will do tech enablement, some will do manufacturing, some will do healthcare. I think it's just a matter of where your business is in the growth cycle. But the one thing I will tell you is these firms are getting larger and larger with more money under management.
My turn?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, go
That,
for it.
oh
Jack.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So let me give you a little bit of background. We have at Shoemaker made a significant investment in artificial intelligence. And a lot of people think when you artificial intelligence is chat GPT, and that's kind of their kind of perception of it, but obviously it goes beyond that. And so, bolstering our team for that, because we see already that in M&A deals, that there is significant inquiry regarding the use of artificial intelligence in the business. And it's part of a discussion of efficiencies and efficiencies of scale within the business. What investment have you made to do better and really compete with your competitors that are investing into bringing artificial intelligence and efficiencies and other things into the mix? And so what are you seeing currently, and what do you see down the road as far as the use of AI, the required use of AI, the preferred use of AI within businesses that might be on the selling block at some point, or the desires of buyers in that, for us, due diligence, there's a whole nother category now. And it was developing, in a smaller fashion in dealing with, and actually reps and warranties in, at the tail end of that article in the APA or the stock purchase agreement, there's been no data breaches. There's been, you have all these things that you are letting us know that didn't happen. But now, and that's more of notification, but seems now it's more assertive in that, okay, you're not just going to tell us that all these things are good. You're going to demonstrate to us that you have invested in the protections. So the social engineering aspects of trying to get into systems, but then also the efficiencies. So that's a very loaded question. So let me kind of boil it down. What do you see as the introduction of AI into businesses, both operationally, but also in anticipation of being bought or sold down the road?
Right. That's a great question. Whenever I think of artificial intelligence, I always think of Gary. I'll be here all week.
No, that's non-intelligence.
Yeah, same difference. Jack, great question around that. And you're seeing it more and more in these deals every day, especially in the healthcare world, where people are utilizing artificial intelligence to make the billing more efficient and some of those things. In terms of in the documents and things like that, I think people are becoming more aware of it. People are evaluating how it can help their business. We did a deal in environmental services, and we did a deal in the road construction space in the last quarter. And neither one of those companies has really thought much about artificial intelligence. They're looking at it to help some of their bids, or looking at it to help some of their billing and things of that nature. But it's a great question that a lot of people are behind the eight ball on, is how I'd answer that. We don't see people as prepared as they should be for this artificial intelligence. Granted, where it goes to, how long it takes to get there, it's going to affect every industry. But I think people are now starting to see how important it is, whether it's in the documentation that you mentioned, or whether it's in another factor of their business. They're starting to realize how important it is to be able to fend off cyber attacks, to make representations, things of that nature. So I think, in summary, they're behind the 8 ball at the end of the day, but it's coming up quickly as people hear more and more about it. It's the biggest news item, obviously. Just depends on the industry. Healthcare seems to be further ahead than, say, manufacturing, from what we've seen, and I'd like to hear your view on that too. But some industries are ahead, some industries are behind, in terms of their use of AI and their responsibilities around AI.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I think.
sorry, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, hit it.
I was just going to say, as a follow-up, this is more of a comment. What we've also seen is, there's the difference between an open system and a closed system, and a closed system that's being developed within a company, and having vendors that say they can do certain things, but can they really? I mean, when they say that they are linked together with Microsoft, are they really linked to Microsoft so that everything's all integrated? And I say that by the fact that we internally have an AI task force. We were told or shared that there was a law firm, not ours, that implemented a closed system, and they thought everything was great until they realized that maybe they shouldn't train the system properly for things like, they said, all right, for everything that's titled employment agreement, then do these things, harvest this information, do this to create the database, not thinking that maybe some people saved documents in their system as CEO agreement or something else, and so it was not properly trained. So as we've all been told, you're only going to get out what you put into it, whether it's open or closed AI. So more of a kind of a warning as to, or a suggestion that be mindful of what you're doing with AI, whether you're doing it internally or externally with vendors, that you're getting what you want to get out of it, but you need to be, I don't want to say less trusting, you need to be mindful of what it is they're offering and the parameters of it. And I'm not, I'm a nerd, but not techie enough to say, okay, well, you're missing 3 bullets on your to-do list that you need to be happening within this system, kind of thing. So again, more of a comment, but Adam, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, in the manufacturing space, even though, because we have some clients that actually do some machine learning, Internet of Things type stuff for manufacturers, and it's been a tough slog to get manufacturers to adopt anything new in that area, primarily around visual quality control and inspection, kind of repair and maintenance schedule for machines and stuff like that. And I think that probably comes down to, in the healthcare space, it's easy to isolate down and do a small pilot, to see if it works, which is completely different from, Gary, shut the line down.
Right. That's right.
From a cost and a risk perspective. So I think that's really what's driven the problem. But I do have a question too, Scott.
Hold that question 1 second. I mean,
sure.
Jack, back to your question. Is your original question was, sometimes we see our clients up to speed on the AI side, closed or open networks, but for instance, on the healthcare, the other side may not be open, or they may not be up to speed on AI. So everybody's kind of at a different level. And if you've got 2 people that are kind of sophisticated at that level and have utilized it the right way and have set up the networks, you can transfer that information. Data heavy businesses, perfect example. But you may have one side that's done a lot of work on it, and the other side hasn't, and to transfer that information, it's still cumbersome at the end of the day.
Okay, and don't forget Adam's question and comment, but the follow-up question is, do you see an impact on purchase price and value because there's this proportionality. So meaning a buyer saying, okay, you know what, you don't got your stuff up to speed, so we're going to reduce the purchase price in order for us post closing to get it up to that. Or, you know, and therefore on the seller side having to take a discount because they're not ready. Have you seen that? I don't want to say again, I'm going to say it, weaponized in negotiations as far as purchase price because of that disproportionality of preparedness? That's a
We-
lot of big words. Sorry.
Yeah, we've seen it weaponized, not a lot yet, but I'm sure it will be. We've seen people use that to get from a discounted standpoint, just because their systems are not where they should be. This goes back to whether you know what kind of systems do you have? Do you have good systems for the company? Are they good accounting systems? Are they good management systems? You know, we've seen the discount when you can't pull. You know, I'm actually in with a client in Kentucky today, and you know, a pretty large company, $25 million in EBITDA, and they
Wow.
can't produce financial statements. So
What?
we're working with them to help get to that point, but we're in the middle of a transaction. They're still working through some of those things. So just
Wow.
depends. I guess it doesn't happen a lot is what we've seen so far, Jack. Go ahead, Adam.
Cool. So,
Wow.
you know, carving out obviously the most important thing is have your financials together and be able to produce data and answer questions without a whole lot of thought is the number one most important issue when entering into a transaction. But if you were to pick like, you know, number two and number three, you know, hey, if there's two things where you need to have your shit together that will make a big freaking difference in the way that this is going to go for you and the premium that you're going to get outside of, you know, having my financial house in order, what would you say they'd be?
Make sure you know what your strategic goals and objectives are. You know, we talked to a lot of people say, hey, yeah, I've been doing this for 25 years. I want to retire. Well, when you start this process, you're just at the beginning. So if your goal is to, you know, work for another 3 to 5 years, make sure that that's outlined on what you want to do the next 3 to 5 years. So know what your strategic goals and objectives are. You mentioned systems. Obviously that we can't, you know, you have to be in good shape with your systems. 3, make sure your customer relationships are strong. You know, a lot of times in a lot of these situations, as you guys know, a buyer is going to want to talk to your customers. So having those customer relationships and the buyer being able to talk to those customers at the appropriate time, and those customers, you know, having a good relationship with you, not up and down, not, hey, I lost this customer for 3 months and they came back, all happens, but having strong customer relationships that will last through diligence is very important. You know, where else I would see is make sure you've got your, back to the strategic goals and objectives, make sure you've got your management responsibilities pretty defined. What we see in a lot of these sub $100 million companies is they may not have a clear CFO. Who's the clear CFO in that role? Who takes on the financial responsibilities of the company? So have your management responsibilities outlined, whether it's a COO, CFO, CEO, have those responsibilities outlined. You know, you mentioned, as I'll mention again, systems, but I think making sure you've got good firms that are advising you, legal, accounting, and other, insurance, whatever it may be. You'd be surprised at the end of the day when you go to do a transaction and you've got firms that can't advise you the right way, can't give you the estate planning, or can't give you the tax views as both of you guys can, Adam and Jack. You need to have sophisticated firms that have done things before. That's important. Sometimes we get into these situations where you may have one person that's had one specialty their entire career and they get thrown into a situation and we get the first letter of intent and we get a markup back that has one mark on it. Well, Jack, I'm not an attorney. but if I see one mark on it, there's something wrong. Somebody didn't do the job.
Definitely.
So having the right advisors to advise you through the transaction. You know, we've got another transaction that we're working on right now. And, you know, you typically don't get escrow money in these transactions. But one advisor said, hey, you should get escrow money in this transaction. Well, it's a $45 million transaction. You're not going to get
Wow.
escrow money. You can in Gary's favorite world and on different type transactions, you can get escrow money, but not on larger transactions.
Yeah.
So I think it's management responsibilities, strategic goals and objectives, systems, as you mentioned, and advisors are kind of the 4 key ones. I don't know if any of those are knockout ones, but those are ones where we see the most issues.
Yeah, that's really good. Scott, for this audience, which we got a whole range of folks that are on this thing, define like your sweet spot and then define how that differs from business bankers. I mean, business brokers. Okay.
Well, I have many friends that are business brokers, but Gary
Yeah.
loves to give me shit about that. Sorry about the swearing, Jack. I'm new to the show. This is only my second time, but
Well,
if I
you're,
was
you're
around-
Adam Boatsman.
Adam knows
Yeah.
that I use more swear words than I should. So does Gary. You know, our typically, and we've moved up over the last couple of years, our deals are typically 5 million to 25 million in EBITDA, which are somewhere between $25 million transactions and $250 million transactions as our proceeds going to the owners. What's different from us than a typical business broker, which I have many friends that do this, is they deal with typically kind of 1 to 3, 1 to 4 million in EBITDA, which are under $25 million transactions, which is all great. Different part of the market. You know, in the business brokerage world, you deal with individuals and sell to individuals. We sell to industry buyers and private equity groups, no individual buyers. So those are the biggest differences, are size and ultimate end buyer.
Thank you. That was good. I want to ask, so the reason I'm wearing the Culture Runs Deep t-shirt for Movement Mortgage, which I'm a huge fan of Movement Mortgage. So big shout out to Casey Crawford and that team. They built a juggernaut that's just really killer and good. But culture is a big deal. We've seen it in so many transactions. When I was in PE and before and since then, where the deal guys, like all the numbers look great, but then things start sliding because of this. And I would love to hear a story, no names, but where you've seen it done right and when you've seen it not done right.
Ooh, a good question. You know, we've done 156 deals over time, so there's lots of examples in doing it right, but I'll give you one from a while back. We did a larger transaction. The company had been around for 75 years when we got involved.
Wow.
Long-term employees, 30, 40 years. Had built a culture, low turnover, had built a culture of, you know, togetherness. Let's build this company together. We're open with the books, knew where the company was in terms of where financially, etc. When the transaction happened, it was very smooth because the CEO could go to the CFO or to the regional manager and have that openness to talk about what was happening. There was a transaction was going to happen. There might be some change. Here's what the change is going to be. And that was floated down through the employees towards the end of the, before the transaction closed. That was floated down towards the employees. The CEO then took in for part of that culture and said, all right, you've got this much in your 401k. I'm going to match that as a transaction bonus and give you X dollars on top of that, depending on where you are in the company. So
Wow.
not only was it complete, the culture was aligned all the way down from top to bottom, but they financially aligned them, because obviously going through a transaction like this is a change. So they were actually aligned financially as well. So those, I can go into more details about deals like that, but that was one where the culture was evident from day one, from every buyer that we brought into the situation, and the ultimate buyer who that company traded 3 or 4 times afterwards to different private equity groups every time.
Wow.
The bad culture is a little different. You know, usually it means that information is not shared readily between people within the company. It's more secretive. We had people go through a transaction that actually got in a fist fight in the conference room
Wow.
while we were doing the deal. Luckily, the buyer was not in the room at the time, and I had to break up a fist fight. But they were not
Wow.
aligned culturally. One was a 60% owner, another was a 35% owner. They didn't see eye to eye all the way through this transaction. So they were actually at each other's throats the entire transaction. They didn't tell any of the employees about it. Luckily, they had built somewhat of a culture below, and it was a smaller firm, but they were able to, retention was pretty high. They lost some people, but the culture was kind of everyone out for themselves is the best way to put that. And those deals are harder to get done if everyone's not aligned at the beginning.
All right, there's a question came
Been
in,
through
but let
this
me,
so many times.
sorry,
Doing
Gary.
some sort of a cultural compatibility assessment on the front end, where you can get people like what we would do. We would get the top 3.
Gary froze.
Yeah.
You
Is
get
that
to go. You get to go.
Is that artificial intelligence?
It got gummed up. All right, I'm
Yeah.
gonna ask my question while
Yeah.
when he comes
Yeah.
back. What is the best way in the due diligence phase to figure out culture and culture differences, other than the obvious of, okay, exchanging information? And I was thinking, and I've actually recommended this to my buyer clients, if a seller client ever came and said, hey, we were thinking about this, or thinking about allowing this, it'd be, no effing way I would allow them to do that. But I was thinking kind of like undercover boss and our secret shopper. I mean, have you seen, first, so 2 questions. One is, generally, as I said, what is the best way to conduct due diligence on culture? Because that is just, I think to really get a feel for it, you need to have insider knowledge. So do you plant an insider in the form of an undercover boss type thing? So 2-part question.
I've never seen the insider or the undercover boss type situation. What I have seen, you got to remember, on an average deal, the buyer and seller talk for about 45 hours between legal
So
negotiation.
basically, it's marriage at first sight.
Right.
We're going with reality TV.
I mean, think about it. From a legal standpoint, you'd spend a lot of time on legal docs, but you don't spend a lot of time negotiating, but you don't spend a lot of time talking about culture. So what we typically do is have a 2-day scenario where the first day we go through all the questions that the buyer has, site visits, whatever it may be, but most of the questions we can get through the buyer's concerns of financial diligence, customer diligence, competitive diligence, those types of things. The second day, we talk about culture, and we focus on what's the culture of your business. We found that works a lot because no one ever spends time on culture.
Yeah.
You know, we say, well, what kind of bonuses do you give your employees, or how do you incentivize your employees, and how do you do this with your employees, and how do you do that with your employees? So we try to have these 2-day sessions where the diligence is mostly taken care of, and that second day you spend talking about culture. Again, it depends on the situation. If you're a platform company for a private equity group, that's one situation. If you're an acquisition for a strategic buyer or a private equity group that already has a company in the industry, it's another situation, because you've got to make sure that, you know, that your sales incentive programs are the same or close to the same. You know, you don't know how many times we've talked to people about, well, I don't get a car allowance now, and they'll try to blow up the deal over a car allowance. We're talking a $50 million deal and a $500 a month car allowance. So getting down to the details around culture, how you incentivize people, what's important to the company, what's the growth of the company, you know, is the owner, you know, not a good owner? When I say that, I didn't mean it that way, but are they holding the company back? Is there different people they can put in place to help the company grow? Looking at and being honest and straightforward. You got to figure out those 45 hours. If you can add another 10 hours and figure out what that culture is, that saves a lot. And those are the most successful transactions. Because if you don't get the culture, you know, it's a hard go from the start.
Yeah. So I'm back. Thank you, Spectrum. But that's exactly what we've seen too, Scott. What we would do a day and a half session between the two management teams, and we get down into the nitty gritty of the first 90 days, like what's going to happen, who's taking what seat, what responsibility. And then we did a thumbs up, thumbs down vote after the day and a half based on culture. Like, yeah, we had, high level financial diligence that, hey, does this make sense? And every time we did that, and there were times that we did thumbs down based on culture and probably avoided a landmine, but when we did it and it was right, it just smoothed a whole lot of stuff out, and it got stuff out in the open. So I'm really glad that you addressed that. Thank you for doing that. Thanks for being patient while I was away in cyberspace somewhere. But Doug asked this question to you, Scott. So he says, as part of the process of preparing a company for sale, is the seller better off moving owner-occupied real estate in a holding company ahead of starting the negotiations? Maybe a better way to ask is if the PE or investment buyers are just wanting operations, where a strategic might want the operations plus the physical location.
Yeah, great question, Doug. I mean, most of the situations that we do on these transactions, either the real estate's already in a separate holding company or it's moved over into it. Depends on what the goals and objectives are of the client, but we typically say you can get a 5 or 10 year lease with that passive income, or pay down the debt on the building or whatever it may be. So typically, we'll see in these situations, you can move it before the transaction. Obviously, check with your advisors if there's any tax consequences, but moving it into a separate company, and then, you don't know how many companies we don't see that have no leases, or they have the leases that they have are not real leases at the end of the day. So put together a bona fide lease where it's a real lease, it has escalators in it, because a lot of times the buyer will come in and look at those leases and say, if they're a PE buyer, usually they want to lease the real estate. They will go by some of the terms on those leases. So if you don't have escalators on one lease and do have it on another, don't get caught in a situation like that. Make sure your leases are uniform. On the strategic, yes, you would want to still move it over. You want to make sure, again, from a tax consequence, but there's different ways you can get to the same answer on that question in terms of being able to hold hold the real estate or sell the real estate. Just depends on when you do it, and you got to make sure that there aren't tax consequences.
And can I ask a follow-up question on the culture and due diligence as to, as buyers counsel, you want access to employees sooner or later to kind of get through that culture. As sellers counsel and as a seller, you want to, okay, make sure everything is good to go before you even possibly disclose the possibility of a sale.
Yeah.
Or let anybody have access to your employees. And then that's counter to the buyer wanting to get to know whether or not he wants to retain employees. So what would you say is a typical range? And maybe there isn't, because it just depends on the deal itself and it's deal specific, but as to how far away from closing do you typically see access to key employees?
30 days or less. That's
Okay.
what we've seen. Obviously, our clients always tell us, and we agree with them, we want to make sure there's not any fly in the ointment in terms of any deal points, legal points, whatever it may be. So if they want to have a comfort that if they go in and let them start talking to those customers, etc., that this is basically a done deal. So within 30 days is typically what we see.
Perfect. Well, as we're coming up towards the end of the hour, first of all, just a reminder, it's week 250 according to Adam Boatsman in the truck. And so that next week 250 at the Hamilton, 10:30 a.m., doors open. You do need to register. So ping me if you have not registered and you want to be there, because that's going to be a fun group of people. We've got, I don't know, 40 or 50 people, I think, signed up. And it'll be fun at the karaoke lounge. So you don't have to get suits and ties and all that kind of stuff, because we won't be, but the Dumb Kings will be there. So 10:30, and we'll be finishing it up with the live portion and the recorded portion at noon. And then you can hang around. There'll be food and that sort of thing. So anyway, we hope to have you there. Scott, thank you for taking time out of your day in Kentucky. Like that looks, I was like, where are you? Okay, now I know you're a client. Thank you for what you do. We appreciate your friendship and just how freaking awesome you are, in spite of what Adam says. Jack,
First of all, I
Adam,
want to know how you guys can hang out for 249 weeks.
it works.
I mean,
Seriously.
look, I love Adam, but I couldn't hang out with him for 249 weeks.
I give you my best version, Scott. You get my best version.
I mean, Jack could put on a good face and ask the right questions, but Gary and Adam, I'm not sure if I could hang out with those guys for that long. So kudos to you, Jack.
You get 6 days in between, so it's okay.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah, you
That's
gotta have a
long,
breather.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're back in town, come and join us. Oh, let's see. Oh, I think I saw Jamie Boyder. Yeah, hey, he's going to be there. Awesome. It'll be fun having you there, Jamie. And anybody else, the more the merrier. We got plenty of food. And Duncan, donuts.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We'll
I
see you guys.
appreciate it, and thanks for making me Adam Boatsman. I feel like a different person now. So.
Thank you, Scott,
Yeah.
for showing up, and everybody, please do show up. I don't want to take home all those yummy pretzels bites
No.
home with me like in
Yeah.
prior times. It's just not good.
Yeah.
All
Hey,
right.
so
All right, see you
Scott,
guys.
get it done. Make
I
it
will.
happen.
I'll try.
All right.
Thanks,
See
Gary.
ya.
Thanks,
All right,
guys.
bye.
Thank you, guys.
See ya.